He was standing on the shore when the last one left. That's how the elders told it. Not as myth, not as warning, but as something a person had witnessed and passed down with the precision of a thing that actually happened. The Tuniit, the people before. Stronger than any man alive. Shy in a way that made grown hunters uncomfortable. And gone now. Completely, finally gone. Without a fight. Across 4,000 miles of Arctic coastline. From Siberia to Greenland. Inuit communities who had never met each other told the same story. The same physical details. The same strange temperament. One elder described a Tuniit man lifting a full-grown walrus from the water alone. Not dragging it, lifting it. The kind of specific, impossible-sounding detail that doesn't survive centuries of retelling unless someone actually watched it happen and could not stop thinking about it. The question that archaeology spent 100 years trying to answer isn't whether the Tuniit existed. The Inuit always knew they did. The question is what happened to them, and why the answer, when it finally came, was stranger and more troubling than any story the elders had kept. The stories didn't travel through books. They moved the way Arctic knowledge always moved. Spoken, winters long, firelight, one generation pressing it into the next. And what's remarkable isn't just that they survived. It's how consistent they are across communities that had no contact with each other. The physical descriptions are nearly identical wherever you find them. Exceptionally strong, not war story strong, but specific. A man carrying a walrus, a woman lifting a kayak frame no group of men could shift. Broad shoulders, shorter than the Inuit. And the temperament, shy is the word elders use most often, but it means something more precise than shy. It means they didn't retaliate. When pushed, they moved. When threatened, they left. There are almost no accounts of the Tuniit raising a hand against anyone. That behavioral detail is strange because it's not flattering to a culture that would have needed to defend territory. The Inuit didn't invent a weak neighbor to feel superior to. They invented a neighbor so strong he could lift a walrus and so gentle he wouldn't use it. And then there is the detail that sits at the center of every account like something unresolved. The Tuniit wept when they left. Not scattered wept. That same word, that same image, carried in stories from Greenland to Alaska, 3,000 miles apart, told by people who could not have compared notes. Which raises the harder question. Memory across centuries distorts. Heroes grow taller, villains grow crueler. Were these portraits accurate, or had time made the Tuniit into something they never quite were? And was there anything left in the ground that could answer that? There was something in the ground. The question was whether anyone would recognize it for what it was. When archaeologists first began working Arctic sites in the 1920s, they kept pulling up tools that didn't fit. Harpoon heads with no socket, carved in a style unlike anything the Inuit made. Small blades struck from flint in a technique that looked almost European, almost ancient, almost raw for the region. The initial assumption was contamination. Mixed layers, disturbed deposits, anomalies. Except the anomalies kept appearing. Different sites, different islands. Hundreds of miles apart, the same strange tools surfacing from the same deep sediment. By the time enough of them had accumulated to force a reckoning, the picture was unmistakable. This was not noise in the record, it was a signal. What the digs were uncovering was a culture that had spread across the entire Arctic, from Siberia to Greenland, and had done so not recently, but across roughly 4,000 years. They were eventually named the Dorset, after Cape Dorset in Nunavut, where some of the earliest finds concentrated. Their sites show a people who hunted seal at breathing holes, who carved small figurines with a precision and a strangeness that still catches you off guard in museum cases. And here the oral record and the excavated record begin to pull toward each other. The Tuniit of Inuit memory, widespread, ancient, gone, and the Dorset of the dig sites match closely enough that nearly every researcher now treats them as the same people. Which makes the next question the one that won't go away. How does a culture this old, this widespread, simply end and leave almost no one behind? 4,000 years is almost too large a number to hold. But the Dorset didn't start 4,000 years ago. They arrived in the Arctic around 800 BCE, inheriting a landscape that older Arctic cultures had already worked for millennia before them. Their roots stretch back into traditions we have only fragments of. People who lived on the same ice and the same coastlines long before the Dorset refined what it meant to survive there. By the time they reached the eastern Arctic, they weren't experimenting. They already knew this world. What they left behind tells you a great deal about what kind of knowing that was. Their tools are extraordinarily fine, small, precisely made, adapted to cold hunting in ways that took generations of failure to perfect. They hunted ringed seal at breathing holes in near-total darkness, in temperatures that kill unprotected skin in minutes. They did this without dog sleds, without the bow, possibly without the kayak in its Inuit form. These are tools we tend to assume any Arctic people must have had, and the Dorset appear to have done without them, and thrived for over 1,000 years anyway. How that was possible is a question the sites raise and don't fully answer. And then there are the faces, small carvings, found at sites where almost no other representational art exists. Ivory and bone worked into human features with a precision that stops you. Miniature, exact, hauntingly expressive, as if someone, alone on the ice, needed to make faces where there were none. Those faces stay with you, and they point towards something the tools confirm. This was a people whose survival ran entirely through their own bodies and their own minds. No dog to pull a sled across a pressure ridge, no bow to reach a caribou at distance. Every kill closed by hand, or by foot, or by something stranger. The Dorset hunted ringed seal the hard way. Seal are creatures of habit. They maintain a network of breathing holes through the ice, returning to the same holes on a rhythm measured in minutes. A Dorset hunter learned that rhythm. Stood over a hole sometimes for hours in darkness, in cold that stiffens the fingers in seconds, waiting for the faint disturbance in the water that meant a seal was rising. The harpoon strike had to be fast and precise, one shot, no second chance. But there's something the bone record hints at and a few sight patterns suggest that takes it further. Some hunters may have approached seals resting on open ice not by stalking upright, but by lying flat, moving slowly, stopping when the seal lifted its head, mimicking the animal's own restless shuffling, disappearing in plain sight by becoming, in the seal's reading of the world, just another seal. That is not a technology. That is a discipline. Patience carried to the edge of transformation. They were, by every measure, exceptionally good at being here. Which makes the question that comes next almost impossible to ignore. If they were this well adapted, why did they disappear precisely when a new people arrived from Alaska? The answer arrived from the west. Around 1000 CE, a new people began moving east out of Alaska. Not slowly, not tentatively, but with what looks in the archaeological record like genuine momentum. These were the direct ancestors of the Inuit alive today. And they were not traveling light. They brought dog sleds capable of hauling heavy loads across sea ice. They brought umiaks, large, open, skin-covered boats that could carry a family and its gear through open water. They brought the bow drill, which meant faster fire, faster tools, faster everything, where the Dorset worked with patience and discipline. The tool arrived with systems, interlocking technologies that multiplied what a single hunter could do. The pace of their expansion is one of the genuinely startling facts in Arctic archaeology. The tool reached Greenland within roughly 2 centuries of leaving Alaska. 2 centuries to cross the entire top of the world. Archaeologists still argue over what that speed implies, whether something was pulling them east, new hunting grounds opening as bowhead whale populations shifted, or whether something was pushing them, some pressure at their backs we haven't fully identified. Either way, they arrived. And they arrived into territory the Dorset had occupied for 4,000 years. What happened at that contact point, whether it was competition, conflict, or something quieter and more indirect, is exactly the question the evidence has never cleanly answered. So they arrived. And the archaeological record gives us a narrow, frustrating window into what happened next. At some sites in the eastern Arctic, Dorset and Thule occupation layers overlap, not separated by centuries, but by decades, sometimes less. The same stretch of coastline, the same hunting grounds, used by both cultures within what amounts to a single human lifetime. That's proximity. What it doesn't tell us is whether the people involved ever actually saw each other. There are a handful of objects that look like trade goods, a Thule-style tool turning up in what is otherwise a Dorset assemblage, or carved forms that seem to borrow from both visual traditions. Researchers have spent considerable effort on these. Most of the cases under scrutiny turn out to be ambiguous. Diffusion or independent invention can explain a lot, but there is one site that cuts through the ambiguity in an unsettling way. A Dorset occupation in the eastern Arctic where Thule-style objects appear, not in a pattern that suggests exchange between living people, but apparently scavenged. Picked up from a camp that was already empty, already abandoned, the Thule material arrived, and the Dorset who found it did so after the people who made it had already moved on or disappeared from that spot. That is the texture of this contact. Not a meeting, possibly a near miss, which raises a question the evidence alone cannot settle. Were these populations ever in proximity long enough for memory to actually form? And if the contact was that glancing, that brief, why do the Inuit stories about the Tuniit feel so vivid, so particular, so inhabited? The stories feel inhabited because they name specific behaviors, the shyness, the strength, the refusal to fight. Details that specific don't come from a near miss, they come from watching someone long enough to form an impression. And yet the genetics say something that should be impossible to reconcile with that intimacy. When researchers extracted ancient DNA from Dorset remains and compared it against the full sweep of Arctic populations, past and present, what they found was a lineage that had been folding inward on itself for a very long time. No gene flow from the Thule, no gene flow from earlier Siberian populations moving through. The Dorset were genetically sealed, an island of people in a continent of ice. And here is the beat that lands hardest. That isolation didn't begin when the Thule arrived. It predates the Thule expansion by centuries. The Dorset were already cut off, already genetically alone, long before anyone came to replace them. Whatever sealed them off happened earlier, and whatever sealed them off held. A people can vanish from the genetic record in two ways. Absorption. They are folded into another population, their lineage diluted but surviving. Or extinction. The line simply ends. The ancient DNA rules out absorption. There is almost no Dorset ancestry in any living Arctic person. Not a trace worth measuring. The oral tradition said withdrawal. The genetics say something more final. So if they weren't absorbed, they were erased. The question is how. The first serious hypothesis is climate. The medieval warm period, roughly 900 to 1300 CE, is usually framed as good news for the Arctic. Warmer temperatures, longer summers, easier movement across the land. And for the Thule it was exactly that. Open water and shifting ice corridors helped them spread east with remarkable speed. But the Dorset depended on stable, predictable sea ice. They had refined every tool they owned around fast ice hunting. Breathing holes, still water sealing, the specific conditions of a cold, locked coastline. Warmer temperatures didn't just inconvenience that system. They may have dismantled it. The same climate lever that pushed the Thule eastward simultaneously pulled the floor out from under the Dorset. One warming event, two opposite outcomes. The second hypothesis is competitive exclusion. The Thule arrived with bows, large umiaks, dog teams capable of hauling serious loads. If two cultures are hunting the same prey across the same territory, and one is dramatically better equipped, the arithmetic is brutal even without a single act of violence. Prey collapses first in the overlapping range, and the less efficient hunter starves. Disease is the third candidate. An isolated population encountering a new group carries essentially no immunity to pathogens that the newcomers have long since adapted to. History offers too many examples of how quickly that gap can empty a landscape. And then there is direct violence, the hypothesis the oral tradition gestures toward and then retreats from. The Tuniit are remembered as unwilling to fight. That framing could be cultural memory of something real. But here's the problem none of these theories solves cleanly. Any one of them, even in combination, might reduce a population. Starvation, disease, displacement, these leave survivors. They leave pockets. They leave someone who marries into the neighboring group and carries a lineage forward. The genetics show none of that, which raises a question that none of the four hypotheses has yet answered. What mechanism produces zero descendants? Zero descendants. Not reduced, not absorbed, gone. Which means whatever ended the Tuniit wasn't just pressure, it was a mechanism that closed every exit simultaneously. And the oral tradition, almost in spite of itself, may have named that mechanism. The Tuniit were unwilling to fight. They withdrew. They yielded. The Inuit who remembered them didn't frame this as weakness exactly. It read more like a cultural character, something almost admirable, the bearing of a people who simply did not meet force with force. But admiration doesn't survive contact with arithmetic. A disposition against conflict, repeated across enough encounters, across enough generations, compounds. Each withdrawal seeds ground. Each yielded resource is one less buffer against the next bad winter. And the Inuit were not passive actors in this. They were expanding, skilled, adaptive, and, by the evidence of their own traditions, sometimes willing to press an advantage. If the Tuniit chose withdrawal over resistance at every contact, what happened when there was nowhere left to withdraw to? That is the loop the archaeology can't close, and the oral tradition doesn't answer. But it points towards something uncomfortable, the paradox at the center of this entire question, the very trait the Inuit remembered with something like admiration, their refusal to harm, may be the precise mechanism of their end. For a long time, the Tuniit stories sat in ethnographers' notebooks under a heading that functioned as a polite dismissal. Folklore. Interesting, colorful. Not evidence. Early 20th century anthropologists recorded the oral accounts in remarkable detail. The giant strength, the shy bearing, the refusal to fight, the sudden absence. And then walked to the next site over and excavated Dorset artifacts without connecting the two. The memory and the object were in the same region, sometimes gathered by the same hands, and the category distinction kept them apart. Folklore was what people believed. Archaeology was what happened. That separation held for decades. Then the DNA closed the gap, and the oral record turned out to be the more accurate document. The Inuit had described a people who were genuinely distinct, who did not merge with them, who ended rather than transformed. Science needed ancient genomes to reach that conclusion. The Inuit had carried it in spoken language across roughly 30 generations. The Inuit knew. They had always known. It took science a century to catch up, which forces the harder question. If memory preserved what excavation missed here, what else might be stored in traditions we haven't taken seriously yet? Traditions still waiting for the instrument precise enough to confirm them. One answer to that question might be sitting in a museum drawer right now. Not in a genome, not in a midden layer, but in a carved piece of ivory the size of your thumb. The Dorset left almost no biological trace. What they left instead was art. And it is extraordinary. Miniature bears with their spines exposed, as if the carver needed to show what was beneath the skin. Loons mid-dive, wings tucked, caught in a split second of motion. Shamanic figures, human bodies with animal faces or animal bodies wearing human expressions, that suggest a cosmology built on the idea that the boundary between species was permeable, negotiable, something a skilled person could cross. Then there are the faces, human faces, carved in ivory and bone, some no larger than a fingernail. Most are types, broad-cheeked, stylized, following a recognizable form. But one face, found on Baffin Island, stops you. It has features so particular, a specific set to the jaw, a specific weight around the eyes, that it looks less like a type and more like a portrait. Someone specific, someone the carver knew, which raises a question the art doesn't answer. What were these for? And why, when the Dorset ended, did this tradition end so completely? Not one of these carving styles survived into Inuit art, not even as an echo. No carving style survived. No technique, no motif, no echo. Whatever those objects meant to the people who made them died with the knowledge of how to read them. That is not a transition. That is an ending. And here is the number that makes the ending harder to look at. Genetic studies suggest the entire Dorset population may never have numbered more than a few thousand people. At its peak, spread across an Arctic the size of a continent, in small bands, across 1,000 years of storms and starvation and unimaginable cold, they were always a small flame. What is remarkable is not that the flame went out. What is remarkable is how long it held. But here is the question that does not close, the one this entire story has been circling from the beginning. Was it inevitable? Was there a version of the 13th century in which the Dorset held on, learned something, traded something, changed something, or were they always going to end? Was it the tool who ended them, or the climate, or some combination of pressures that left no single guilty party? Or did they simply step back, one more time, the way the stories say they always did, until there was nowhere left to step? We cannot answer that. The bones don't say. The DNA doesn't say. Even the carved face on Baffin Island, that one specific face, that specific jaw, those specific eyes, doesn't say. It only looks back. What we have is this: a people who were real, who are gone, and who left almost nothing behind but stories and carved faces. The only people who never stopped remembering them are the ones who watched them leave. The Inuit kept the Tuniit alive in language for 700 years, in a tradition that didn't need to, in a memory that chose to. That is the last trace, and it turns out to be enough to know they were here.